be having a discussion on current farmers movement that's happening in India today. This is the largest human protest in the history of mankind. I want you to take a pause on it. The largest human protest in the history. So in today's discussion, we will look at the causes and effects of why and how it happened and how and why we are here where we are today. We will also look at the wider implications of the current movement. If you're following the news closely, the movement is just not confined to Indian subcontinent or India or the borders of Delhi. It is spread all over the world. It has uncovered many, many issues that farmers and other institutes which are linked with farming are facing today. So we will discuss all those issues today. Bhai Sahib ji, Jagjit Singh ji from UK is a successful businessman. Also, he's a passionate sevadar with Khalsa Foundation. And many of you must be or might be following him as well. Bhai Sahib ji spent enormous time of daily time out of his busy business. He spends many hours educating the Sangat of the current situation that's in Punjab. Bhai Sahib ji sends the daily briefings from the ground zero. Also, Dr. Mohanpal Singh Virji is a medical doctor by profession, and Bhai Sahib ji is a very passionate about Sikhi and also has a very holistic view on how can we move forward from where we are today. And what are the larger implications beyond Indian subcontinent? We farmers in Western world are facing similar situations. Bhai Sahib ji will give us the viewpoints on that and discussion items and things to think for us and action items that we can do. So we welcome both of you, Bhai Sahib ji, Jagjit Singh Virji and Dr. Mohanpal Singh Virji. And thank you all of you to join us today in this very exciting conversation and a conversation and discussion that we need to have. Once again, we do humble request to please keep yourself mute. And if you have any questions, please do put in chat and we will have put forward after the initial introduction to the current topic by Bhai Sahib ji, Jagjit Singh ji and Dr. Mohanpal Singh ji. We will pose those questions to Bhai Sahib. So we will start with Bhai Sahib Jagjit Singh ji from UK to give us an overview where we are today, how do we get in the current situation, and then we'll go from there. Bhai Sahib ji, go ahead, please.
Can you hear me all clearly?
Hanji Vijay, go ahead, please.
So we are in this current situation because the super rich around the world, and we got in this situation because so many countries are now so dominated by capitalism. I'll also say if anyone wants to speak Punjabi as well, so I speak dual language, I can do that. Or if everybody's comfortable with me speaking English, I'm happy. So if you want me to speak Punjabi, please just say and I'll speak dual language. So the super rich in the world have realized that actually, especially with the lockdown and everything, but many of these plans have been in place for 7 to 8 years in India, is that they're basically the market which is always going to be in demand is the market of food. And people, as the world population is growing, more and more people need food. And essentially those people that are super rich, and this is why even you find in North America, some of your richest people in North America have become large landowners just in the last few years. And essentially what's happening is they're trying to capitalize on the market. Now, the situation with India is that people like Adani and Ambani have been basically running their kind of corporate businesses, regardless of who's in power, whether it's Congress or BJP or etc. But essentially what they've had now is because Modi is such a vain leader, he's so easily manipulated. They have seen massive gains in their wealth because whatever they say, he will easily do, especially with Adani. Now, Adani fundamentally funded most of Modi's campaign with the BJP. And if you look according to Bloomberg, and the reports I put on my daily updates, Bloomberg show that he has actually gained more wealth than, and if you compare just two other billionaires with him, if I was to compare Elon Musk of Tesla, so Elon Musk has basically created electrification or inspired electrification of vehicles and has really set the tone for modern vehicles, but has created massive change in the way people look at electric cars. And obviously he's now owner of the largest car making company according to the stock market in the world. So he's had massive gains in wealth. Then you also look at Jeff Bezos with Amazon, and what Jeff Bezos has done in terms of Amazon basically killing the small shop holders, even other corporations, etc., and really capitalizing on retail around the world. Huge shopping malls have gone bankrupt because of Amazon, but even both of them bring so much change in wealth. Adani has actually created more wealth than them in the same period of time. So Bloomberg is very clear on that. And when you look at the business record of Adani in terms of what, if you go on the internet and read the Adani files, which is basically about the mining that he has in Australia and the environmental issues behind that. He's recently, according to certain news reports, which I've shared, he's linked to the Myanmar killings and the regime behind there. And so as a result, he's been taken off the stock market, according to some certain reports. And in terms of his track record in Africa, which has led to the poisoning of a huge, even whole countries have basically complained about what Adani has done there. And so essentially his track record is extremely dubious, but he enjoys the patronage of BJP and Modi. So him and Ambani are creating their own kind of way of numerous industries, but what they've done in India is they basically have asset stripped India. So recently you see a situation where I think 9 airports were being, in terms of privatized. Adani didn't even meet the criteria. Then the criteria was changed overnight. And then a few weeks later, it was clear that Adani was awarded every single airport for running that. So many sections of what is called normal life, because the Indian government has given up on running these kind of systems themselves, whether you see in Punjab, where it comes to education, it comes to healthcare, it comes to so many aspects of building roads, and every part of the thing, everything has been privatized. And of which this Gujarati grouping, of which includes Ambani and Adani, are at the forefront of that. In terms of what happens in Punjab and what's happening with the farmers, so we've known in Punjab, we've had numerous issues with water and everything else. And a lot of things, the media is constantly blaming Pakistan, etc. But these owners, they actually have massive investors in Pakistan. So when they basically, if they create a situation that's so bad for the farmers, that allows them to do a land grab, which means that if the farmers are committing suicide, if the farmers are taken to the brink, then they're forced to sell their lands. And then when they sell the lands, these corporations will come and buy them. And then when these corporations will come and buy them, they will use them same farmers as labor. So where you become a stakeholder and running your own destiny, as what we call in Sardariya, you lose your Sardariya and you basically become Mazdoor. And so as well as running this in terms of for the farmers, they're also running this as well as helping the arm Mazdoor uplift himself as well. So it's about helping the average man. And what you have to understand in India, since the COVID situation, the COVID crisis, where mass levels of people had to leave the cities, the labor of the cities went back to the farmlands. The population of India that was in agriculture has gone from 45% to 55% of the Indian population has now gone back into agriculture. So many of these people that were doing labor in the cities have gone back and say, so etc. And what the actual policies of the BJP, or especially Modi, is that what they're trying to do is they're taking away the livelihoods of 55% of the Indian population to make the 2 richest people in India even richer. That's what it fundamentally comes down to. And essentially, the reason that the farmers and everyone else have not been removed, like was done previously with the citizenship protest or the Kashmir situation, is mainly due to the fact that the large amount of noise that's being created by the diaspora around the world. But even the diaspora, while many people have got a lot of passion, we sometimes lack facts. We have a lot of emotion, and we need to arm ourselves with knowledge so that we can talk about the very things and tackle the situation in a way that's far more productive than possibly we're doing at the moment. So I've just thrown out some ideas there to create some discussion, and then other people can then ask the questions, and obviously Virji can give his perspective as well. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Thank you, Virji. This is a great overview of where we are, the current situation, the disguised corporate hand behind these three laws that just started the whole movement. So now we'll go to Dr. Mohanpal Singh Virji to give us an overview in terms of what are the larger implications, the similar situation that's happening in North America. Sometimes we're so focused on the situation in India that started the whole discussion, but there is a larger issue currently that's happening on the international level. Virji will explain that. Go ahead, Virji.
So you're absolutely right. Whatever Jagjit Singh Virji was just describing, I want to take a step back from that and maybe also describe some of the history of how we got there. And so when we talk about conventional farming, which is a hijacked term to mean modern farming, there's nothing conventional about it. It's relatively new. It's only been around for about 60, 70 years. So I'll call that modern farming, but it really began after World War II, when we see after the war, the United States had a big industry going, making weapons, basically. And so they had a lot of nitrogen, which was used in bombs, explosives, and they had a lot of metal that was being produced for the various weapons, tanks, et cetera, that were used during the war. And so they were trying to figure out, what do we do with all this surplus now, this industry that we've developed? And we had known for a long time that nitrogen was actually a really good fertilizer. It was used by plants. It was very good for growing crops in general. So we see the munitions industry kind of transfer over into the agricultural industry. And when they used to make bombs, now they started making fertilizer. And so with the fertilizer, we saw an increase in crop production. We saw an increase in need for mechanization as well. And here's where you get the metal industry, the steel industry really gets involved in making tractors and making farm equipment, et cetera. And this is what really gave birth to modern day farming in the 1950s in the US. This was primarily a US driven industry. And from there, we see fertilizers, increased crop production. We also see the chemical industry move over into agriculture as well. Companies like Monsanto, which is infamous of the industries, who start making pesticides because they say crop production has increased, but now so have the pests, the so-called pests, which are really animals that are eating the same food that we're eating. So you have this booming farming industry all of a sudden that's dependent on fertilizers, it's dependent on pesticides, it's dependent on mechanization, which also these new techniques for farming also require more water. And they're also dependent on consolidation of the land. And so we start to see big conglomerate farms start to emerge in the 1960s as well. And this is really where the corporate takeover of agriculture begins. And this is what's called the Green Revolution, because we saw an increased production of crops. Now, they couldn't just leave well enough alone. So a lot of these corporations went on a global scale. Part of why the US industry went into Asia was also a fear of communism. They didn't want countries like China and Russia having influence over so-called democracies like India and other countries. So India was, no pun intended, but it was fertile soil for US companies to really come in and kind of take over the agriculture industry there as well. And that's exactly what they did in the 1960s. So they brought in the mechanization, they brought in the fertilizers, they brought in the pesticides, they brought in the modern farming techniques that were supposed to increase the amount of crops. And all the time that they're doing this, they're touting this as a way to feed more people. We can end world hunger with modern farming techniques. And of course, now we know that that's not true, that we've had enough food in the world to feed people for a long time. It's all the reason why people go hungry is because of politics of how that food gets distributed. It has nothing to do with the actual amount of food that's out there. And so this is really where we get the corporate takeover of India as well, with India's Green Revolution in the 1960s extending to modern day. Now, the problem with all this, you might say, well, why is that a problem? You're increasing agricultural production. But the problem is that at the same time that you're doing that, you're actually destroying the land. You're destroying people's ability to cultivate that land. And as farmers found from the 1960s onwards, not only in India, Punjab, but the rest of the world, was that at first they had really booming production of crops. Their harvests were amazing, but over time, what ends up happening is the land is less fertile. And so you need more fertilizer to cultivate the same amount of land. You need increasing pesticides, because we now know that insects and various bugs that eat the plants become resistant, and it's a real problem. It's similar to antibiotic resistance. They evolve to adapt to the new environment. And so you have these super bugs that are now, that the traditional pesticides are no longer as effective against. And as I said, increased demand on water, but we also saw the consolidation of land. Prior to, in 150 years ago, the average farms in Punjab were on the order of like 200 hectares. A hectare is about 2.5 acres. And so today, the average farm in Punjab, single farm, is about 3 to 4 hectares. So you're talking about the average farm in Punjab has been divided so many times for various different reasons, to the point that they're really, really small farms. They're not conducive to these farming techniques that really thrive more on bigger farms. And then, as Virji had described, the corporate takeovers have really, really driven farmers into debt. They have lower and lower production on their farms. They require higher, bigger and bigger loans to maintain that farm and produce the same amount of food. And so they're driven into poverty and debt until the time that their land is eventually taken over by corporations. And so it's not a sustainable model, is the point. And it's not only affecting Punjab, it's affecting the United States, it's affecting Canada, it's affecting the West, it's affecting all countries of the world, Africa, South America. We see it everywhere. So this is not just a Punjab issue. It is certainly a Punjab issue. It is a Sikh issue. It's an Indian issue, but it's also a global issue that really needs to be addressed, because the underpinnings of why we're in this situation is really a global issue. It's a corporate issue. And so it's an issue of not keeping capital corporatism or corporate capitalism in check. And it's an issue of having agricultural sovereignty as well.
Thanks, Virji. This is, I think this time drives this point home, that the issue currently the issue is corporations trying to come and take over the small farmer, and they're using governmental connections. And in India, we all know it's basically corporation, Adani and Ambani, playing through government to suppress the farming. So Jagjit Singh Virji, a question for yourself. In terms of where the situation is right now, there is quite a bit of emotion involved with the protesters in India. Since you are quite in touch with the movement that's happening right now, is it an emotional movement, or individuals who are on the borders, they have a strong understanding of the cause and effects of this current situation?
If you have a look at Punjab was basically at the forefront of it from the beginning. Haryana has taken more of the burden now, but we started off in Punjab. Now, what's actually happened in our community is that we have a lot of debates, we have a lot of discussions, on TV channels, on radio channels, and a lot of it is not based on facts, but based on personalities. So it's like, yeah, we believe in Lakasdana, we believe in Deep Sidhu, they're communists, or this, that. And it's a very kind of thing where it's a lot of it is emotional based.
Right.
When you compare that to what's happening on the ground floor in terms of what's happening in Delhi, there's very little of that. And there's a lot of kulla dil, assi sare ikatthe hain, doesn't matter if you're from Haryana, it doesn't matter, langar sareyan shikai jana hai, we're all getting hit. We're all getting targeted in the same way, etc. And a lot of the things that happened have been based around messaging, partly by the people running the morcha, but you have to understand how difficult a task it is. Now, I don't know how big your Nagar Kirtan is in Toronto, but let's say you have maybe 150,000 people, maybe when you get your main Vaisakhi Nagar Kirtan.
Yeah.
Would you say that?
Yeah.
And you look at the amount of sevadars and organization that is involved and how much food is involved in doing that. And then you compare that, that's what they're dealing with every day. And they've done that for the last almost 150 days or close to almost 200 days in Punjab. So you got to think of it logistically, it's a massive operation. But to really understand what's really going on, I have to just briefly bring into this the story of Punjab. And if you can give me maybe 10 minutes to just explain this.
Sure, go ahead.
What you have to understand about Punjab, why was Punjab so rich under Maharaja Ranjit Singh? Because at that time you had the Silk Road, and because you had the Silk Road, it was a major feeding hub for not just India, but for China, the Afghanistan areas, all the way into the Middle East. This was the breadbasket of an entire region, and that commerce was happening everywhere. So when 47 happened, there was two intentional decisions that were taken by the Nehru, Patels, and everybody else. That was one, they didn't want to have a situation in India where you have Muslims come into power, then Hindus come into power. So they thought, how are we going to make sure that always Hindus come into power? Or basically Brahman Raj, as what we would refer. And that concept was to aid Jinnah into allowing Pakistan to be created and Bangladesh to be created, that allows us enough of the vote bank of the Muslim community to be put into there. And that way, statistically, no matter what happens in India, there's always going to be Brahman Raj. So essentially, it doesn't matter if it's BJP or Congress, there's always Brahman Raj in India. But the second part of this was the biggest threat to that model of Brahman Raj was the power of Punjab. So intentionally, when the Radcliffe line of Punjab was created, intentionally Lahore was taken out of Punjab. That was an intentional thing. Now, if you go from a plane from Amritsar airport, you can see Lahore, you can see the lines, the lights. You know, when you look at where Amritsar is, where Lahore, which are historically called twin cities because they were reliant on each other, and even down to where Nankana Sahib, which is only a little bit further, and that was intentionally because Lahore was the power base of Punjab. This is where Maharaja Ranjit Singh's rule was. This was the intellectual capital of most of the Singh Sabha lair and all the Sikh lairs that happened. My grandfather told me before that all the Panthik movements that you saw happened from the Pakistan side. So you look at Nankana Sahib Morcha, Punjab Sahib Morcha, all the morchas started from that side. That was the intellectual hub of not just Sikhs, but also Punjab. Now, Lahore is one of the largest mandis in Asia. If Punjab could do trade with Lahore, and look how close it is, it's much closer than Rajasthan where the food goes to. It's much closer than Agra, Delhi, all these other places where the food goes to. That is the nearest major food distribution hub. But intentionally, they won't allow us. And the people that are creating that situation are the very corporations, the owners of Ambani and Adani, that own the TV channels, which does all the anti-Pakistan propaganda. But they themselves are one of the most invested people in Pakistan. Ambani and Adani have major interests in Pakistan, but they demonize it because it helps the BJP, helps their vote bank and vote bank politics. But you watch, Punjab has water issues at the moment. When they've done their land grab, when they've taken all this land from Punjab, there's going to be zero water issues there. They're going to release the waters. The only way you can do a land grab is you make the people so difficult for them to survive that it's easy for them to buy the land because they're giving it away from you. That land is some of the most expensive land that will be in the future around the world, because everything's going to be where you've got natural resources where you can produce food. That is the future. The future conflicts is not going to be over oil that we saw in the last 2 decades. They're going to be over fresh water and food. So this is what we have to understand, is why Lahore was taken out. So in terms of the way we are designed, the way our mentality is designed, we are designed to always look at each other and micro-analyze each other. Oh, is Lakha Sadhana, should he be Amritdhari, should he not? Or is Deep Sidhu, is he a Gadar or is he not? Or is these kind of things? And they're micro-analyzing each other, and they're forgetting the bigger picture, which is who is Andani, who is Ambani. If you understand anything about politics in India, the politics of India is the politics of distraction. It's basically, if you look at any other Western country, the news will talk about our healthcare system, our education system, our roads network, and pressure is put onto government. What are you doing to sort these out? In India, there is no focus or no pressure on any of the ministers to do that, because they have cricket and they have Bollywood. You keep giving people cricket, you keep giving Bollywood, you basically demonize Pakistan, and all the TV network time is taken up by that, and no one ever talks about any real issues. So that is the way it works. And so when these actual corporations and these things, because what you've had in India, especially during the BJP, is the mass of takeover of media by a political party. So Modi is the only prime minister that's never done a press conference. That is just like crazy. Even Trump does press conferences, but Modi didn't do one. Because when he is questioned by actual journalists, I mean, they'll get Akshay Kumar to go and ask him questions about does he like mangoes or not, but they won't actually ask him, what is your policy on this? What is your policy on that? Because Modi is just the front man. He doesn't actually run anything. The real power base in the BJP is Amit Shah. He's the actual decision maker there, who actually makes decides what is actually happening here. Modi just basically plays his vanity thing in the front and basically prances about. That's why he calls himself an executive prime minister rather than a hands-on one, because he doesn't understand policy. And when you listen to his speeches, they're so lacking in content that it's laughable. And then when you've got media which it's like Fox News on steroids, when you look at the kind of news media that you get there on Republic TV and Z TV, etc., and then you realize, but the problem is the majority of the population is being spoon-fed this, even though they know it's lies, but because they're so used to it, they're immune to it now. So a farmer, when they talk about Jai Kisan, Jai Jawan, which was a nara from a previous Prime Minister of India to basically build up agriculture in India, that Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, the fundamental person, the group of people that really who have done that has been Punjabis. They have basically been the Kisans, and their sons have been the Jawans in the armies. When it came to the Pakistan wars, when it came to the China wars and everything else. But then at the same time, they'll talk about Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, but at the same time, they will demonize the Sikh community. Why will they demonize Sikh community? Because essentially, if you're the only people that are standing up and giving voice to what is actually happening, because all you have to do in India is say, look, Muslimana ko inniya countries, ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਇੱਕ ਹੀ country ਆ, ਉਹ India ਆ, ਅਤੇ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿਰੁੱਧ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਬੋਲੀ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਦੇਸ਼ ਕਰਦਾਰ ਹੋਣੇ ਪੈਣੇ ਆ, ਹਨਾ? And this is so easy to manipulate, hana? And so you have to look beyond these kind of narratives. And we as a community need to focus on who are the real people that are behind this. It's not even Modi, it's not even the BJP, even though they're the front thing. The real people behind this is Adani and Ambani. You always follow the money. And if you want to basically know what the real thing is, you follow the money and then you see. So when I talked about Adani basically doing that, becoming the most largest expanse in terms of billionaire in the last 2 years, and you look at Adani, who only yesterday bought one of the largest mansions in UK for 79 million, which I'm going to put in the next update tomorrow. You know, this is the kind of wealth that they are creating, and they're creating it on the backs of the poorest people on this earth. And when you live in rich countries like Canada and UK, we don't always understand how affluent we are. You know, the fact that if you just got a car in your house, you're above the 60% of the world population. If the fact that you're a graduate, you're already in the top 10% of the world population. And, you know, the fact that if you got a college degree, you're almost in the top 5% of the world population. And the fact that we're so used to our lives here, it's hard for us to really understand and put in perspective what is actually happening around there. But one thing we know is that Jere Buzurgia Opakea. Jere Buzurgia Opakea, because they know the value of their lands because they built it. When you look at our generation say, oh, te koi nahi zameen bech do, aithe hor investment kar lene. We can buy property in America or in Canada. House prices are constantly going up. But what you don't realize is you're not going to be the breadbasket for the world, which Punjab will always be. And the second thing is if we cherish Darbar Sahib and Anandpur Sahib and all these other things, if we cherish our langars and everything else, all of these things only happen because we own the lands around it, and we give langar to Darbar Sahib, and we give langar to Anandpur Sahib, and we've created that kind of situation there. So regardless, one of our things that our Buzurgs always said, that no matter how comfortable you are in UK or Canada, you should never forget that you have Jameen in Punjab, and never sell your Jameen in Punjab. Our Buzurgs always said that because they said, you never know what's going to happen in the future, and you might have to go back one day, and you should have something to go back to. And I think as we're getting more and more generations, we're feeling so comfortable here, that we're forgetting actually, is that really important what we have there? And I think we need to maybe give it a bit more importance.
I think it's a great point. It's coming back to the gist of the conversation is then it's the corporations who are behind this change they want to bring in, and it's basically a systematic land grab from the small farmers. There are two very good questions out there. I just want to mention them. One is, why don't we give ownership to the farmers to sell and distribute? I believe that's an issue right now. The farmers do not have resources to take the produce they have to outside of the province and sell it, or outside of Punjab. So one of the rules, one of the 3 rules that we did not mention them because they have been beaten to death for last year. Everybody has spoken about it, so we went directly into the issues. The question that I just want to briefly go to the answer for that. One of the provisions on these 3 rules is to give ownership to the farmers to sell their own products. So this will be a challenge for an average farmer to go out of their land when they finish the crop, they're ready for the next one. What's required is a systematic government intervention to stop the exploitation of the farmers. Another question we have is how the farmer will protect their land when everything is under control of Ambani. That's the whole fight about. Farmers don't want to be in that situation where Ambani.
Just answer them. By Mohanpal Singh will probably have something to contribute.
Hanji, actually, I do have a question from Mohanpal Singh Virji before we take the next question from Mandir Singh Virji. So Virji, we have seen this protest that's happening in Punjab. Virji explained it very well to Jagjit Singh Virji. What do you feel the global implications to this farmers' protest that's happening right now? How do you foresee it?
So, as I was alluding to earlier, the modern farming methods are unsustainable. We really need to go back to an organic method of farming, which really empowers farmers. This is how they will increase their crops. They'll provide healthy food for people. And we also have to encourage consumers to support those efforts as well. the idea of sustainability goes hand in hand with Sarbat da Pala. It's the idea that you can produce food that's not only good for the farmers, it's good for the people, it's good for the soil, it's good for the community, it's good for the earth, it's good for the environment, right? So the idea of Sarvat da Pala that we should live up to and we should try to embody in our day-to-day lives really goes hand in hand with organic farming. So when we talk about the global implications of that, again, it's a global resistance against corporate takeover. As mentioned, our politicians are basically corporate pawns. They do the bidding of the corporations. Those are actually their constituents that they're serving, as well as the corporate media does the same thing as well, right? So, and we see Canadian companies as well. They're like vultures circling India. They can't wait. They're salivating, waiting to swoop in and start exchanging commodities at dirt cheap prices, which will drive farmers further into debt. And there have been articles written about that as well. So I think on a global scale, when we're talking about these issues in Punjab, we're talking about the farmers in Punjab. Again, this goes back to farmers in Canada who are going into debt. What are we going to do to support those farmers? Well, there's a lot that we can actually do. Farmers markets are a great way. They've actually been a resounding success in the West with supporting small farms, supporting organic farms. You're basically cutting out the middleman. You're cutting out the corporations and allowing communities to directly interact with the food growers, which I believe is a really, really important aspect of all this, is that you know who grows your food and you know what goes into it, and you understand the nutritional value and you understand the value of growing that food when you directly interact with your farmers. So this is what I call conscious consumerism, which is you decide where your money is going to go. This is how you can have a huge impact by deciding every dollar that you spend. This is how you're going to vote for whether corporations succeed or whether small farmers succeed, whether organic farmers succeed. This is how you will vote. This is one major way in which you will vote, is where you spend that dollar. When you go to the grocery store, when you go to the market, whether it's here, whether it's India, whether it's the UK, and you have a choice between buying organically grown tomatoes and conventionally grown or modern techniques used to grow tomatoes, when you pick up the modern technique grown tomatoes, you're voting for that company to stay in business and grow, and you're actually voting against the small farmer who grew those organic tomatoes. So these have to be conscious decisions that we start making in our day-to-day lives. It's not enough for us to complain about politicians and complain about corporations, but then continue to support them financially. And that's exactly what we're doing. These corporations don't exist without us. And so we have to understand, we have to re-empower ourselves, I think, is one thing as consumers, and really understand the kind of power that we have. No industry can survive without its consumers. And so if the consumers revolt against these corporations, against the takeovers, by not purchasing their products, not supporting their products, then people like Ambani and Adani, they lose interest because they're only in it to make billions of dollars, right? They're only in it for the money. These corporations fizzle out. And that's actually what capitalism was supposed to be. And now it's become this monstrosity that's out of control. But letting the markets decide who survives and who dies, really, when you think about it that way, it's really empowering to consumers and to people in the West. So this is something that I think we need to pay more attention to, is how we vote, and also who we vote for into office. We know that most of our politicians are corporate pawns, as I said. We know that their allegiances are to corporations. So why do we continue to vote for them? I don't understand that. It's something that we have power over. And what we do is we vote them into office and then we expect them to change, which is absurd. The whole power that we have over our politicians is to hold our vote against them before we actually go and vote for them. To say to them, I will only vote for you if you promise to do this, this, and this. And only once they do that do they have our vote. But this whole system has been flipped on its head by corporations, essentially, who lobby, who have an incredibly powerful lobby with our politicians. And we see the revolving doors between politicians and corporations as well. So we really need to start changing. We need to empower people just in our minds. It doesn't even require anything external to really change the world. If we change the way we think about our food and our consumption and change the way about how we use our vote, we can really, I believe, make really big strides, and help people halfway around the world who are struggling against this issue as well.
Yeah, excellent point, Virji. Support local and I'll use your vote, the power of vote. There's a very good question from Rupinder Singh Virji from Detroit. Is it inevitable, is it imperative that farming will be automated due to technology? If so, should the efforts be taken to help people transition rather than continue? Repealing bills will only take us back to the same problems we had before. Jagjit Singh Virji, you are pretty close to what's happening in India. Do you think this understanding or this mentality can help the individuals on the ground?
This is basically comes to the crux of it, and we have to understand that if the actual farmers get their way and the laws are repealed, they're only where they are now. The situation hasn't actually improved. They've still got the water issues, still got the drug issues, still got various other things. The kind of change that's coming is coming regardless of these three laws, And so if you really want to help Punjab, especially those people that are into computer IT commerce, if they can help create situations where these people can basically do commerce through other platforms outside of Geo, that would really help them, because ultimately it's all about who's controlling the market, and Geo knows that they're going to get a massive actual data from running these systems in terms of agriculture and everything, and they're going to be able to manipulate the markets according to that. So we need to look at how we can use the knowledge we have in the West in terms of IT commerce and use that to help Punjab, because ultimately, if you think about it, the producer should be king. If you look at normal economics, the producer should be king. But in Punjab, the producer is not king, because basically there's so much levels of corruption and various other things. So the Mandi system is not a perfect system. It needs to have change, and that change is so extreme, it's basically designed only for the corporates. In terms of one, Benji, I think asked a question about why can't the farmers just buy and sell? They can. If you look at it, in the early updates, I put on news stories from NDTV. I know this is one of the channels that was least showing both sides of the story. It still has that same kind of nationalist approach, but at least it was open to the farmer's side, whereas the other channels weren't at all. And they were showing stories about how in UP, farmers are basically like cabbages. They were taking cabbages to sell, and people saying, I'm only going to give you ₹1 a cabbage. And then they were selling it for like 90 odd rupees. And this kind of market, because the farmers have no power. And this is part of the frustration of the farmer. So in that particular story, which NDTV showed, he actually dumped all them cabbages just there because he knew by 2 days' time, they're all going to be kharab anyway. And this is the thing, is the farmers are being stranglehold by the actual markets and everything else around them. What Geo is trying to also do is introduce its own seeds. So what Geo is doing is saying, what now, normally if you have a crop, from that crop, you will have the seeds for your next crop. But what Geo is producing GM seeds so that you only can buy, the crop doesn't produce its own seeds. So that every year the farmers have to go back to Geo and buy seeds. So then Geo can manipulate the crop to whichever way it wants by genetically modifying the seeds. So there's so much going on here. And a lot of people, the key thing is, what we have to understand is, in Punjab, we talk about the Green Revolution. The Green Revolution actually damaged Punjab. significantly. Damaged Punjab's organic farming, damaged Punjab's agriculture, took away a lot of the trees, a lot of the birds. We have a youth in Najwan who's doing a master study on the birds of Punjab. And it's even the birds that we talk about in Gurbani, some of them have disappeared.
Yeah.
And you look at so many things that the Green Revolution has changed in Punjab. Also, we have to, the other side of this is that we also have to recognize is that the farmers need empowerment, and the empowerment comes from people who are social individuals raising their voice so that they can talk about the ethical good of society, like by Mohanpal Singh has been eloquently doing here. But no one is actually telling the story of the farmers. Instead, they're being demonized. And we have to be careful not to be drawn into that narrative. And ultimately, many people who are Sikhs are Khalistanis. Khalistani is not a bad word. The Nishan Sahib that they were so, they started calling now Khalistan flag, that Khalistan, that Nishan Sahib has been in Punjab or in generally in the whole Indian continent for 400 years. And it was what was protecting India. And way before an Indian flag even came into existence. So, you know, it's the narratives and understanding the words, how people manipulate the words to create these narratives that we have to be very careful of. Ultimately, as VG has said, we have to create economic platforms. And one of the key things what we noticed was when we had the clampdown on our social media sites, some of the first people that were clamped down on were the people that were saying that the cryptocurrency is going to help the farmers basically do trade across borders. And they were one of the first sites that were actually shut down because it was bringing revolutionary ideas to how to actually work with the farmers there. But what you have to understand about the farmers is the education of Punjab is intentionally brought down. Punjab as a state, even in 1947, was at number 1. It's now gone to number 15 economically. Punjab has no airport for cargo. That's intentionally designed so that food cannot just go from Punjab over to Pakistan, China, South Russia, so that it has to go through other states for it to be exported. And you know, the politicians of Punjab should be saying, why is there no cargo airport in Punjab? I know they've got military airports, but no cargo airport for commerce. And if you look at refining is all done in Gujarat. Look how far Gujarat is from Punjab. Why can't Punjab refine its own foods? And it's all because they also see that Punjab, they don't want the ideas of Punjab basically being free, and therefore they're subjugating it. So in the video that I created, you also saw about the economic zones. The economic zones, they intentionally were designed to take industries away from Punjab. So the industries of embroidery that were in Jalandhar, sports that was in Jalandhar, other industries of things that were in Ludhiana and other things were intentionally taken away to Gurgaon or other areas, so that basically these kind of jobs are taken away from Punjab. As a result, what is the industry that is most pushed in Punjab is of immigration agents. Wherever you see any news story, whether it's to do with Punjab or anything else, where are the adverts? The adverts are all Aithe Canada jao, Aithe Australia jao, etc. And this is intentionally designed. The most effective policy that's been used against Sikhs, to just take away the population of Sikhs. First, it was in terms of genocide by bullet killing them. Then it was drugs. But the most successful policy that's been used against Sikhs has been immigration. And we have to recognize that. We have to recognize that immigration has been used in such a way to depopulate Punjab and bring other populations over. But if you look at the people of Bihar, and I have no issues with the people of Bihar because even one of the original Panch Bihari was from Bihar. If the people from Bihar are coming to Punjab and adopting Sikhi, we love them. But if they're coming to Punjab and they're bringing cigarettes and drugs and everything else, then naturally we have issues. But what you have to understand is, why are the people from Bihar coming to Punjab? They're coming to Punjab is because they're not landowners in Bihar, and these very corporations have basically took them to that level where they have to go out of state for work. So what they're trying to envision Punjab is, they've already done that to Bihar, and that's why that labor is having to go from Bihar to Punjab. So we have to understand that. That's why they're complaining the most. You find people from Bihar all over the Morcha sites. They're saying, "Asi ta Bihar chhad ke Punjab aaye si, hum Punjab chhad ke asi kithe jana?" Anna? And this is the whole thing. This is a much bigger picture there, that we have to understand the wider picture of what's actually happening. And lastly, what you have to understand about farmers, it's easy to say, why can't the farmers sell their things? What you have to understand is many of these farmers don't even have good financial education. You basically taken a farmer from Punjab, you demonetized him. So they used to be based on cash. Now they basically got credit cards and they got ATMs, and you basically say to them, and you speak to Aam Banda on the pen, he goes, "Honta bahut vadiya, honta kand vich card pa ke paise nikal jande hai." Not realizing what is the interest rates on that money, what is the banks doing with that money, how much debt am I getting into? When you look at the West, when in UK and in Canada and America, when you got poorer levels of society don't understand financial education and interest rates and how they're being abused by the banking system and brought into debt, how do you think people invest? It's the same things that are happening there. And therefore you're getting this level buildup of debt that's continuously happening, which is working only for the super rich. But at least in the West, you're having conversations to bring some of these interest rates down and to bring some certain level of financial education. No one is actually doing that in India, and especially not doing it in Punjab.
Thanks, Vijay. So we have two more questions and we have very little time. So briefly, we're going to go touch two things. One is, so we understand the issue right now. There's a corporation issue. Corporations are trying to suppress farmers in India. We have talked about many other issues as well. It's a complex situation. Sandeep Singh Vijay asked a very good question. So who's going to do the real work? Where does an average person start? I would say the farmer in India or outside diaspora does the work, because everybody is feeling very helpless. When you look at the situation, it's much more complex than it looks on the surface. So Mohanpal Singh Vijay, what do you think in terms of what could be the possible next step to move from where we are today? We can look at Punjabi farmers, or for the international situation, you mentioned support local farmer, use your vote. But in terms of changing the situation in India for the average farmer, where they are today, how do they move forward? After that, Jagjit Singh Vijay, if you can please help on the same question as well.
So the issue of farming is really an intersectional one. This is where we really find intersection between economics, sovereignty, things like classism and casteism, as well as issues within our personal health. And so I think being such a broadly intersectional area, there are many, many ways that this should be attacked. I think politically is probably the most difficult. That's probably the uphill battle that is very steep and difficult to fight. As I mentioned before, I think it's easier to fight corporations on a consumer level, but of course they have strong political ties. They have a lot of assets that are available to them in order to do that. But we have to really stop being reactive, and we need to be proactive. You know, our community as Sikhs, we get an A+ whenever something goes wrong. We mobilize, we bring in resources, we help, we bring in aid, we bring in service. But as far as being proactive about the issues that are affecting our world today, including farming, we get like a D+ maybe, or a D- maybe even. We tend to be reactive, not proactive. And so I think the issue is that people have to start to discover how their own actions and their own large implications, how, you know, like I said before, I think we need to start in our communities. That's not necessarily, you know, me doing something here in Canada on a community level isn't going to necessarily have a big impact in Punjab tomorrow or next week or next month. But these are all grassroots level activities that we really need to be undertaking. And I don't think, you know, if we're waiting for some big political movement to start and take over the politics of India, I don't think that's going to happen. As Virji said, the corporations are coming whether we like it or not. They're there. It's not that they're coming, they're already there. They've already manipulated the system to be what it is. And right now it's a zero-sum game where you have winners and losers. So I really think this is a grassroots movement. There are many grassroots movements that have to be implemented here, whether it's clean water, whether it's the climate crisis, which is intimately tied with farming and current farming practices, or whether it's our own health that we're looking at, which is also intimately tied with modern farming practices, which is exactly what the corporations are pushing. And what I think we need to encourage Punjabi farmers and Indian farmers to really go back to organic farming. I think that's the way to really fight this, in my opinion, is to attack it on all levels, but at the same time, take personal accountability. And I think that's the thing we're lacking, is we really lack personal accountability for things that happen in our communities, in our countries, as well as other countries around the world. So, other than that, if you're really passionate and really devoted, I don't see a better way to support a movement than to go there in person and support it in person. We, in a lot of ways, we failed on that level as well. I think Sikhs used to be able to mobilize very quickly to a movement. And in modern history, we don't really see that. People in the diaspora are not willing, including myself, to go to Punjab and personally get involved on the ground there. But it's a daunting task, and I think it has to be multifaceted, and it really has to start with grassroots movements.
Thank you, Virji. Jagjit Singh Virji, if you can please advise on your answer to this in 2 minutes. We do have another question. We are over time actually right now. We have a question on COVID after this. If you can please answer to this. Go ahead, please.
I just want to mention something on a previous question where they said Abani controls everything. Abani doesn't control everything. He controls quite a lot of telecommunications and food and supermarkets and stuff. He doesn't control everything. What you have to understand is they have a bigger problem than the farmers of Punjab do, or Haryana, because basically there's 25 million people in Punjab and most of their economic welfare is linked to farming. I know it doesn't matter if they're in the cities or not. I know the whole of the state is very much a agricultural base. I know. When you basically, if you look at from the BJP's own figures, the RSS has 4 million members in India, population of 1.3 billion, but they make it out as they're like this huge and they control everything. And a lot of these things are very shallow, These TV channel presenters, they're going to disappear very quickly. These parties are going to disappear very quickly, because ultimately 4 million people, it cannot go against 25 million people. The thing is, it's easy. What's happening is they've surrounded Delhi, and that's affecting the population of Delhi. It's not affecting Modi. It's not affecting Abani. Abani is quite happy living in Mumbai, and etc. They're getting on with the things. The day that the movement specifically targets their interests is when you're going to see change. So when they started taking the mask down in Punjab, that was affecting Abani. That hurt him, and so they have to be a lot more savvy in terms of doing these kind of protests. But ultimately, when these geo trucks start coming to Punjab, do you think the people in Punjab are not going to break up the silos and the Adanis and stuff like that when they're realizing that they have no food on the table for their children? This is going to carry on for at least another 2 years, because I believe it's going to carry on till the next election. And the next election is Modi's end of his second term. So that means there's going to be new faces that are going to come in. And with new faces, you get new policies. What we have to look at is the longer picture here. The longer picture here is what you got to pick certain projects. So here, what we've done in UK, we raised £300,000 for Recognise One on one of our TV channels. That £300,000 now, we've got large ones that have gone to Punjab, because one of the things that they were looking at is, why is there so many suicides? When they're reading my daily updates, as well as people passing away from what I believe is COVID, but other people, because there's a lot of people that are dying from heart attacks. And if COVID is not being detected, then essentially what they're going to say, it's a heart attack or breathing issues. I know. So what was happening, but also there was a lot of people having suicide. So that £300,000 is now being used to help people pay people's debts off, help pay people, but that's a very short-term solution. So you start with your short-term wins, and then you empower the people, then start your longer term. The longer term things are stuff like Saving Punjab. The Saving Punjab project that we've been talking about for a number of years is basically re-educating Punjab on how to save Punjab from multiple levels against the water issues, the drugs issues, the agriculture, the education issues, everything else. So we need a lot more people involved in Saving Punjab. We need a lot more people filling in the Saving Punjab survey, where it basically talks about how many people have died from drugs in your village, how many people have died from other issues, how many, because once we have statistics, then you can build a picture, and from that picture, then you can start working out solutions. So the first thing is to have the right statistics. You don't go to your oppressor and ask them for statistics. You have to create your own statistics based on what is the real ground realities. And that's what Saving Punjab project is trying to do. And bringing actual people from the West out education. So if you're studying in universities, we're asking people to do their PhDs, to do their master's degrees on subjects based around Punjab. So at the moment, I think Saving Punjab's got 6 people in UK that are doing high-level studies, but actually doing it on issues of Punjab, so that we can create a body of knowledge, and then we can start really looking at solutions. Ultimately, what I would also say is we need to start creating our own commerce situations so that people can start learning about dealing with it, and also involve a financial education for the people of Punjab. We've got to look at why is 250 students coming to Canada every week. That's a statistic that we've worked out recently. Now you got to think about that. You know, yes, it's fantastic for you guys sitting in Canada. Your vote bank is getting bigger and you've got loads of space. But then we also got to look at it. What is that actually doing to Punjab? What is that actually doing to the future of Sikhs in Punjab? Because you see no level of Sikhs are no longer in any of the top decision-making positions in Punjab, whether it's in police, whether it's in law, whether it's in everything, because anyone that's a young person who's basically got a bit of initiative and is educated is going abroad. So essentially what you've done is in Punjab, you basically have made yourself just to become the farmers of Punjab, and you're not any decision makers in Punjab. You got to look at also the political situation in terms of making sure that we are educating our people so they don't just vote Akalis just because Badal's there. They actually have to look at what their policies are. So there's many, many things like that we have to look at. But what I would ask the people here that are on this thing, if you really want to help this situation, then start targeting Adanis and Ambanis. They got to basically look at what is the Adani files that are happening in Australia. Start saying to your Canadian media, why are you not covering this? You know, why are you not covering it? Why has this person become so wealthy? What is his links to Myanmar? What is his links then to Modi? So that your Canadian media is actually a bit more educated on what's actually going on there. Start talking about this. And why would these companies run these stories if they're getting emails every day saying, why are you not covering this? Why are you not covering this? That is how you protect the farmers in Punjab, is by every day constantly. And I know some people have been doing this on Twitter, and Canadians have been a big part of that. And some people have been doing this on other things, but we need a lot more of it, because the safety of these people is based upon our voices. Now we're coming out of lockdown in UK. Anna, we're now opening up because the vaccines are basically going through, Anna, and many of us have already had our second vaccines, and we basically are getting back to normal. So we're now thinking about what are the big protests we're doing. I think Canada is going into more lockdown, but then you have to look about is when you're coming out of lockdown, what you can do, but during lockdown, what can you also do as well? So what I often say to people is pick your own kind of pet project. Anna, so ours was basically like recognize one, helping stop suicides, looking at Saving Punjab, helping education, various other things. So think about, as a collective in Toronto, what exactly can you guys do as Toronto Sikhs and help in the bigger picture of Punjab? And make that as a collective project, because what's happening is there's a lot of frustration because there's a lot of helplessness. But all you have to do is get together as a community, have a strategy day, and basically say, well, these are the problems. What is the key quick wins that we can do, so that we can do these things very quickly, and let's just get it done. So you get into a habit. We've been doing this for many years in Share Charity, where you have strategy days, where you have some of the best minds that you have there, the most Bantic people, you call them at one venue, or you do a Zoom call and you say, look, what is the key thing? And it's all about solutions. And what you find is out of that discussion, yeah, you will get some politics, but a lot of it will be solution based, and you will have a plan, and then you implement that plan. And what you will do is there'll be so many of these plans, and so many, because you've got such a large collective of population that is Panthic and educated and affluent there, you'll be able to do quite a lot. And every time you achieve something, you believe in yourselves more. And therefore, then you take a bigger picture, then you take a bigger picture, then you take a bigger picture. So what you have to understand is the biggest problem is not from Punjab, it's not Punjabis. Yeah, we're protesting, but they've got a time limit to get this done. And that time limit is while Modi's in power. If they don't get it done in that time, the government is going to change. They nearly lost a major thing, which was Haryana government was about to fall. And you will see this in my updates from about a month ago. And in the last minute, they put money in, they bought off a party and kept their guy in power. Haryana is actually more active than Punjab is now. When you go to Punjab in the grassroots, it doesn't matter if you're in any shed, there's flags for the Kisans everywhere. There's mass mobilization, and there's mass sympathy with the farmers. So essentially, these Adani trucks have to come to Punjab for this to work. They built the silos, but they have to get them working. You think the people are not going to stop that? So they have a much bigger problem, and you have to understand is that we're not as helpless as we think, and we shouldn't build up Adanis and Ambanis as they're like this endless thing. Ultimately, everybody will fall at some point. People thought Trump was like this amazing thing. He's no longer there. Everything is temporary on this earth. The only thing is permanent is Naam and Gurbani. Odi asra lo, and change comes quickly, but change comes from Uddam. So we have to do Uddam, but we have to do targeted Uddam. So we have to be very smart in the way we utilize the energies of our community. So this is the kind of discussions we should be having in the West, not discussing what the personalities are, and we should be focusing our discussions basically on solutions as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Virji. I have a last question on current situation. Just today, there were 330,000 plus cases of COVID in India. What's the implication of the current situation on the protest? Mohanpal Singh Virji, if you want to shed some light on it.
Sure. I'm not too privy to what's happening today. It is kind of surprising that in the last months, this is something that, my wife and I have been talking about quite a bit. Like, why aren't they getting sick? We weren't really hearing about COVID moving through the protesters in Delhi on the borders of Delhi. It wasn't something we were hearing about, but we knew it was coming. We knew it was inevitable that it was going to happen. It was going to come. It's incredible the kinds of numbers that we're seeing in India. Like you said, it's been pretty much all week or most of the week now where they've exceeded 300,000 new cases per day. And they're talking about multiple thousands dying per day as well in India. So I don't know today what the status is of the protesters on the borders. But there's no doubt in my mind that it will come. And like you said, sometimes, a lot of time, I think they'll be underestimating what people are getting sick of or what they're dying of. They'll attribute it to other causes because people aren't going to get tested, for the most part. So they won't necessarily know. But I don't know today, to be honest, what the status is.
Vijay, did you think, Vijay, the reason of the concern, personally, a lot of other people are having is when last year, when there was a movement happening related to Kashmir laws that government passed, the CRA and those laws, I'm just worried they will use a similar tactic to break this protest, saying that COVID is getting in a worse situation, so protest has to move from Tikri and other borders of Delhi. What do you think? You work much more closer with the individuals on the ground.
But the first thing, just to answer the first part of the question, in terms of COVID has always been there. When I was doing the daily updates, I would always put pictures of the people as long as we could get it, and from the front lines, from people like Mohanpal and Punjab, etc. So COVID has been there because when people are dying of heart disease, and a lot of the time it's COVID, because some of the people that were passing away, they were being sent home because they've got strong medical teams from the Sikh charities in all the sites, but they were being sent home, and many of these people were passing away a week after they got home, you know. But because they were linked into the Jathebandiyan, the Kisan Jathebandiyan, we were hearing about them, you know. Now, the thing with what you have to understand about COVID is the way it expands very quickly, the compounding effect. Now, if you've got 500,000 people going to a Kumbh Mela, you know, and then people go to the Kumbh Mela is from every part of India, yeah, and then naturally they're going to take it back. But when they take it back, it's going to expand very quickly. It was such an obvious thing that this was going to happen if you understand how viruses, infections go. You know, it was total stupidity for them to allow the Kumbh Mela. You know, they clamped down on all the Mela, but they basically didn't do anything about Kumbh Mela.
Yeah.
Also, what you have to understand is the psychology of the people that are there, you know? And when you actually speak to them, which I've had the chance to speak to many of the people, and there's people I know, Restadars, etc., that have been there from day one, you know? When you speak to these Buzurgs, firstly, a lot of people don't believe that COVID exists. And you find that in many parts of not just our community, but many communities in the Middle East and in many other places, they still deny it exists. But even when they do recognize it exists, the Buzurgs are saying, look, assi to udda hi mar jana, but assi zameen li marna saadi di badiya maut hai. And so they're saying we're not that concerned about it. We're going to die anyway, but taking our jameens away from us is giving us maut anyway. They're saying we're doing this for you. We're not doing it for us. Assi to mar jana, jameen ta thwada. And that kind of and you can't really, you try to explain to them, Baba ji tusi nahi wapas jao thode li safe ho gaye. You know, this is the whole thing. They'll laugh at you, you know? And so you have to understand there is that kind of mindset there, you know? And is it good for them? Personally, I don't have a big issue if the Morcha sites disband and go back to Punjab. And Haryana, because I actually think they're going to be stronger there. You know? So I think that is normally what you have in a conflict situation, is something called a tactical retreat. You know? But I personally believe that they're not going to do that. In terms of will they get attacked? Yes, they will get attacked if it's not in the news. Mm-hmm. If they can cover the news with COVID or other things and quietly. So let me give you an example. When you speak to Kashmiri activists, they will say that 200 to 2,000 Najwans disappear in Kashmir every night.
Wow.
You know? So the same thing that was happening in Punjab has been happening in Kashmir. Kashmir's been in lockdown for almost 2 years now.
Yeah.
This is what's happening. These are students from universities, Najwans, etc. There's a massive situation that's happening in Kashmir where a whole generation is being wiped out. But you never hear about it because you hear about the farmers, you hear about COVID, you hear about Bollywood and cricket. You don't hear about Kashmir. So unless we don't keep the farmers in the news, that's what we have to understand, is by keeping them in the news, you give them protection. Yeah. The fact that when they put the spikes out on the roads, when they put these barricades up, and then we started pointing out that since the Vietnam War, them spikes on the road are illegal according to international law, then the news companies, they picked up on that. You have to constantly be feeding them information that gives protection to the farmers. If the farmers are not being heard of, that's when they're going to get sidelined. That's when they're going to get attacked. So this is the role of the diaspora. If the diaspora didn't exist, they would have been removed months ago.
Absolutely.
Because they're actually costing crores to the Delhi economy. And the only reason Delhi hasn't risen up that much is because Delhi's on lockdown anyway. If Delhi was normally, this would have been a major issue months ago. But still, according to the Chamber of Commerce of Delhi, it's thousands of crores this has cost them, this farmers' protest. But it hasn't cost Adani, it hasn't cost Adani, and Modi, basically, he's just carrying on as normal. And Amit Shah is distracted with the Bengal elections, so he's not that bothered either. But yet, are the Buzurgs safe? I probably would say no. Do the Buzurgs care? I think, you can see for yourself. Try and talk to any of them.
Yeah.
So you can only do what you can do. But what we can do as a diaspora The key thing is the diaspora can't get quiet. You can't have all your stamina, all your jor, late, protest karte, done a few things on Twitter and think, Jalo, back to life now, let's watch Netflix. That if you start doing that, then it basically, and this is what the Buzurgs always say, the next generation has no stamina. You ask any Buzurg that does langar seva in a Gurdwara, they say, Najwan ena ko stamina nahi hega, any aake ithe seva kar sakte jidda assi karde. And every generation you realize, true, when we're Buzurgs, we're going to be saying the same thing about the next generation. So we have to realize that basically, assi Buzurgan da satkar karde hain. They're basically, we owe everything to them. And you have to understand, is a poem that I wrote a few months ago, where I talked about this is the generation that Akhi saw 1947. Akhi saw the Pakistan wars, the China wars. Akhi saw 1978 and 84. They saw the killing fields of Punjab. They witnessed it with their own eyes. You honestly think, inane bani to dani to darna hai hun?
Yeah.
They've seen a lot worse already. So they have a certain character that we have not seen because we lived in the comforts of the West. But we have to give them their voice. We have to give the narrative to the West. We have to give the narrative to the media, which is what they are expecting from us. When you speak to the Buzurgs, they say, Pota tusi saadi awaaz hai, tusi bolo saade li. That's our responsibility.
Absolutely, Virji. This is a great point. Thank you so much, Jagjit Singh Virji and Mohanpal Singh Virji. It's always a pleasure to have you on these programs. And thank you all for joining. Please do follow us on the social media platform, the sikhinitiative.org. And please stay in tune for more programming that will be coming up. We'll took quite a bit of extra time because the topic was so interesting and our panelists have amazing wealth of knowledge and pointed answers to what everybody wants to know and discuss. Thank you all once again. We hope to see you again in the next program. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.